Thank you for inviting me here. I'll start by giving a little bit of my own background, because the conference is an interesting conference, Spirituality and Management, and I spent my life in management and as an entrepreneur, and then had a sudden shift in 1994. So I've experienced both and integrated them into my own life. So until 94, I was a businessman, started as a physicist, then a computer scientist, then worked in the corporate world, advanced in a big multinational, left and became a management consultant to marketing, telecom, media, these kind of industries. Then I became an entrepreneur and started my own ventures. And at one time when I quit, I had 20 companies in different countries, in Europe, in Latin America, Far East. And something amazing and rather sudden happened in '94, which is a big topic for another conversation. But the effect of that was that on my flight back from somewhere where I had this experience, suddenly it seemed that what I was going back to, running the project meetings and board meetings and flying around the world, I was a very workaholic type person, doing extremely well in the material sense, but always on the verge of maybe a health breakdown or something, because I was just really running around the world. And so something suddenly happened, and on my flight back, it became it suddenly started feeling like I really didn't feel like continuing all this. And by the time I reached my office the next morning, and I stayed up all night, it became very clear that I just wanted to move on. So I got my senior team together. I told them this is not one of the normal debriefing sessions. We'll have something different to talk about. And what I told them is that I decided I want to exit the business, and I want to do it within a short period of time. And I want to go and do something else, and I'm not totally sure what exactly I'll do, but nothing to do with business. And what had happened is a transformation had happened with a very extended encounter with the Guru, and this has not changed. This has not left me since that moment. So it's not a temporary high, but a sort of shift that doesn't leave you. So most of them thought that I probably needed some rest. Some of them thought that maybe I'll get over it. One of them came and said, I also had a midlife crisis once. Some friends in the neighborhood recommended they know a psychiatrist, and so on. And I actually exit my business for $1. I went to each country. I had a business in Poland, which I sold for $1. I had a business in Korea, I had a business in Portugal, various companies. And I felt that I had made enough, thanks to the help of so many people. I was the sole shareholder at the time. And so rather than trying to get something more out of it, I just leave it to the people who have done good karma, their karma they had done, and they deserve to turn this into whatever they wanted to. And so many different enterprises and ventures and entrepreneurs emerged out of that. And I left. And a lot of people in my circle of friends, I live in Princeton. It's a very sort of highly educated people, exceedingly well-to-do people, felt that this guy must be sort of crazy. So some of them tried to rope me into new companies, new ventures, new initiatives, and maybe I need to change the scenery, but I haven't accepted any of that. And since that exit started a new life to the new journey for myself, I decided to dedicate my, whatever I can to the pursuit of this new experience. And for a long time, in this new phase of my life, it was entirely an internal process. People talk about West is rational and empirical, and East is not. But I would adjust that a little bit and say that there is an outer empiricism, which is third-person empiricism. You look at things outside, and you measure them and evaluate them, and then you write about them, and some peers validate it, and over a period of time you keep evolving a scientific corpus. But there is also an inner empiricism. There are processes the yogis have perfected, the rishis have perfected, that allow a state of consciousness to emerge, and different states of consciousness to emerge, when you experience the different parts of being, the different planes and parts of being. And there's many languages for it, many different methods and so on, that different things and different rishis have talked about. But this is a personal journey in which the teachings and the experience of a third person are a role model and a guide, but one has to experience this for oneself. And this is no less empirical. This is first person empiricism. It's subjective empiricism. It is verifiable. People say that the third person empiricism is verifiable, so it's more true, because it's a collective experience. When we all look through a telescope, everybody will see the same thing, so we can verify it, or a microscope. But the inner subjective experience is also verifiable in a different way, because many people who have gone through a certain process and achieve a certain experience then get to talk about it and write about it. And over a period of time, this gets validated. It may be very difficult to achieve because of the human conditioning. We've gone through so much conditioning. But it is achievable. And so over a long period of time, it gets verified, and that's empirical. That is also a science. It's an inner science, and in Sanskrit we call it Adhyatma Vidya, which means the inner science. So for many years I pursued that, and then circumstances, not me chasing, but circumstances would bring me before an audience. I'd have to explain something, they would ask, and I would explain. And this led me to another phase when I started studying systematically, understanding the outer world. So the inner world is not to run away, it's not running away from the real outer world, from the outer empirical world, but to engage the outer world from a different state of consciousness. So it's not irresponsible, it is not absence of rationality or absence of research to produce new medicines and to progress and advance and all of that. It is all of those things, but from a perspective which is not so selfish, and from a state of consciousness which is not like it used to be, with its obsessions and cravings and demands. So first one works on oneself, and then from another state one can re-engage, re-emerge, the same things one used to do, but now they seem different. So I entered that kind of a mode. And then I found that I developed many interests in scholarship, in research and writing, so the book, Being Different, is the first of 7 volumes I'm writing on what I've discovered in the outer world from an inner perspective. And one of the things I found is that there is this thriving spirituality movement in management and business. I have some issues with it. Ram said, make sure you're provocative. And I'm glad he said that, because I was going to be provocative anyway. Some of the issues I have is that there was also in the 1960s, a similar movement in the US, which led to what people call the New Age movement. Because every so often, America suffers a crisis of myth. There is a myth of the Americans, that we are an exceptional people, and we have these founding fathers. There is a certain myth of what America is, and I'm only talking about the US because I've lived there for 40 years, so I understand their culture very well. So this American myth was devastated because of the Vietnam War and the Watergate and civil rights movement and feminist movement. All kinds of things pierced this myth. And so in the crisis of myth, people went looking for answers all over the place. Some went to do drugs, some came to India, and a whole lot of Americans joined gurus, there were hippies, there was a whole thriving new culture. But what happened to them later? Where are they now? And so I started wanting to answer that question. What happened to the 60s, the children of the 60s, where are they now? And why was it not sustainable? The non-sustainability of that became a topic of study. And the reason it's important is that today there is another crisis of myth the US is facing. And again, people are going east and going to various places. And so if we can learn lessons from what happened in the 60s, maybe this time we'll do it better. And maybe this can be more permanent and lasting transformation and not just a fad. I've developed a vocabulary in this book. One of the vocabularies I've developed is, one of the terms I've developed is digestion. By that I mean the digestion of one civilization into another. When a civilization gets digested, then the source of civilization ceases to exist. It's like a tiger digests a deer, and this is explained more in this volume, next volume, a lot more. When a tiger digests the deer, there is no more deer DNA. There is only tiger DNA. Because the tiger is broken into parts and smaller parts and smaller parts, and every copy of every DNA molecule is broken into, because the tiger cannot have within his body the deer DNA sitting, that will be toxic, it will be kind of foreign body. So it has to be broken into very small building blocks and then reassembled back into tiger DNA. That's what the digestion does. And what won't fit has to be excreted as waste, as toxic material. That is bad, considered bad from the tiger DNA's point of view. Now civilizations have been digested. They live in museums. Many civilizations live in museums. You go to museums and you see this is a very exotic civilization, this used to be, and so and so. And there are a lot of good things about them got digested. But after digestion, the good stuff gets recharacterized as belonging to the tiger. It's considered to be the tiger's story, the tiger's history. It's part of that. So this led me to the concept of, another concept I introduced here called Western universalism. In fact, the subtitle of the book is An Indian Challenge to Western Universalism. So it is a provocation. Western universalism is the DNA into which all this digestion reduces. It gets turned into this Western universalism DNA. And Western universalism also has organized religion as a very central part of its DNA. It has materialism. It has the Enlightenment movement. It has the idea of we are the engines that drive the world. It has language. It has frameworks and paradigms that are part of Western history and Western philosophy into which others have to be mapped. So someone was asking me, a young person here who was asking me about a certain organization in the US, and that's one of many stomachs. The Western universalism's digestion is through many, many stomachs, not one stomach. So there's a stomach that is breaking down Dharma traditions into an intermediate stage. The stomach doesn't go straight from food into cells. It goes through many, many stages. There are enzymes that make it down. So the term spirituality is a sort of an interim stage, interim term. And everybody becomes spiritual, like in the 60s, they become spiritual, which means they decontextualize the source of the deer. The deer is sort of removed from it, and it's considered universal, and it's considered generic, and it belongs to all of us, it doesn't belong to anybody. It sounds very nice, but it's not sustainable. It hasn't been sustainable, and the book answers the question, why is that state not sustainable? If it is universal, if it is generic, if it is, for everybody, then why does this intermediate thing called spiritualism not sustain? Then because it gets sucked more into the digestive system and gets reconstituted into materialism and so on. Now, a lot of spiritualism of the 60s led to products. So on the one hand, we are against materialism and reductionism, but it led to products. Be they the tapes and videos and lectures of somebody or whatever, or be they productivity tools, how to make the human worker more efficient in the organization. So the mechanistic model, machine model of an organization where people are machines or parts, cogs in a wheel, and we have to get them more effective. The spirituality got turned into a way to sort of get more out of them. So it's not transformative. It is in the service of the same multinational, same forces that spirituality thought is trying to undermine. The same consumerism is still there. The US military, for example, well, there's a technique called Yoga Nidra. Yoga Nidra is a technique where you achieve a state where you have dual consciousness. One is sleeping, really sleeping, and in fact snoring, and there is witnessing of one's snoring. So there is a kind of, you're not awake because your body is really sleeping, but you are also witnessing that. So this is an old technique, and Stephen LaBerge of Stanford spent 20 years, 30 years studying it, and part of the digestion is to claim it as your personal discovery, because the Western ego rewards people who say, I discovered it. So he renamed it lucid dreaming, trademarked it, started a whole lot of institutes of lucid dreaming. He's at Stanford, important guy. So there was this whole rise of the lucid dreaming movement, and part of this same international enterprise that many spiritualists want to undermine. And the US Army studied lucid dreaming. They hired some lucid dreaming consultants to see if that can improve the performance of soldiers. So now one of the things they're teaching, they gave a contract to somebody I know who's a lucid dreaming consultant to teach soldiers in Iraq how to be more efficient, so you can get more out of the soldier, that kind of thing. Johnson & Johnson gave a contract to a friend of mine who's an American living in France, and she studied Sri Aurobindo's integral model of the being. And Johnson & Johnson, one person she met, a lady who so fascinated, because people have dual lives. There's a spiritual life, but there's also, I have to build my corporate career life, So this person hired her and said, why don't you give us a integral being model on how to improve our marketing. So she found that her contract was products for new mothers, baby products for new mothers. And her job was to figure out, using the model of planes and parts of being, and using the idea that there is a spiritual being in this buyer, how do we change our message? How do we change our message so we are now reaching that particular part of this being, which is very deep inside, and hook this person to our product? So whether it's the US military, whether it's Johnson & Johnson or 1,000 more, the point is that the 60s got digested via genetic spirituality back into Western universalism. Okay? So I have a chart which says the Dharma traditions, they get digested via spirituality into Western universalism. So now what do I do about it? So what I do about it is I research what is non-digestible. What is there in the source tradition which is a necessary part without which it won't work, without which you can be spiritual up to a point, but you won't be able to go beyond a certain point, such that this element, if you remove it, then you have an imperfect, incomplete solution, and you can only go so far. But if you don't remove it, it's going to be very hard to digest it. Okay? So that encounter, the encounter between a tiger and something very delicious that he wants, but it is not digestible, is a very interesting tension point. That can cause transformation. So in this book I identify several major differences between the Dharma traditions and Western universalism. And the Western universalism consists of both the Judeo-Christian religious side and also the Enlightenment movement. I have a lot to say about Hegel and all these guys I've written in this book. And so the purpose of identifying these differences is to say that next time somebody is sincere and genuine about going into the journey that people went into in the 60s, do not compromise these particular elements of difference. Take them along, make them part of, don't leave them behind. And the reason these non-digestibles have been taken out and left behind is because they're non-digestible. So what does that mean? It means that the host is not really looking for a transformation. The host is not looking to really surrender, sacrifice, give up, compromise anything. Says, I will be the tiger I am, and what I can get out of you is what I want. But don't expect that I should become like the gentle deer. You see, a lot of people give me an argument that says, what's wrong with being digested. In fact, a lot of Indian people are very happy being digested because they think that it validates them. Because if a Westerner comes and says, I like what you're doing and I would like to have part of it, then the person, because of the colonization, there's a complex. So the person feels very happy that, gee, wow, everybody's interested, it must be good. So finally, you know, all these things that I've rejected about my own past, I should not reject because others are liking it. There is that kind of what's called pizza effect. Pizza effect is a term, you know, the pizza was a common folks dish, not a sophisticated dish. Common peasants, you know, like if you are from Punjab, you eat makki roti, you know, some peasants eat that. It's very delicious, very good for you, but it's not a high-class thing. Until Pizza Hut made it into kind of global. So then the effect of the Americanization and globalization of pizza, it had an effect on the Italians also. So I remember I owned a company in the 1980s, and I remember people telling me this, that, you know, the guy telling me that, you know, we're going to eat pizza, but during my dad's time, the guy would tell me, nobody there would want to eat pizza because it's not sort of for us. So this is the pizza effect, when the validation by Western universalism plays back on the source of that item. And the source culture feels that they've been validated because Western universalism is so powerful that if after all Western universalism wants it, then, you know, if the tiger wants me, I must be good, you know, that kind of an attitude. So I have a lot of deer, a lot of Indian deer who are saying, you know, we are lucky because he's chosen us. He could have eaten goat or eaten something else. But he actually told me that I'm very delicious and I smell good and he likes me and all that. So people want to know what's wrong with being digested. A simple answer is that the diversity that exists in the cosmos has a role to play. We call it Leela, divine play. There is a role for the deer. There is a role for all these things that exist. And when the result of an encounter between these two is that one of them ceases to exist, it's no longer living, it lives in a museum only, it's no longer an actual living, evolving thing, then you do not get the future benefits that it would produce. It is not static, it's going to produce more, it's going to evolve and produce more things. So the analog I give is fruit tree. If you harvest the fruit, then you must also nurture the roots. So you keep getting more harvests. But if you harvest the fruits and trash the roots, burn the roots, harvest the fruits, it's short-sighted. So that's what happens when you digest a civilization in a manner that the civilization is no longer a living entity. And that digestion often can be unintentional, it can be unconsciously done, it can be done in good intentions, that I'm globalizing it, and by removing all their Sanskrit words and the referring to their pioneers and calling myself the pioneer because I'm American and I can popularize it. I've had this argument also. I've sat down with you know, all sorts of people, John Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness meditation, Stephen LeVer's you know, lucid dreaming, relaxation response by Herb Benson. I've been to 20 of these great digesters and had these encounters, and the argument they give is that, you know, it would have gone nowhere, and when it becomes mine, it becomes legitimate because I'm American, I have all this clout, and so on. And that reminds me of something called the Doctrine of Christian Discovery. Doctrine of Christian Discovery. After Portugal and Spain were naval powers discovering new lands, there was a huge discussion in the Vatican as to who owns all this, who is the owner of all this. And papal bulls, one bull after another, papal bull is like decree, like fatwa, you know, in Islam it's a papal bull. So papal bulls in the 1400s, many of them, said that the property, all of this is property of the Christian world. So when you discover, whoever discovers it first, you claim property of this on behalf of God, that you are sort of, because you're a Christian. So the fact that, this idea that Columbus discovered America, I always ask them, what about the natives who lived there for 10,000 years? You mean they had not discovered it? But you see, their discovery didn't count. Their discovery didn't count. So this idea that when the Christian landed, it comprises discovery, as if the people who were there never discovered it. So even today the books talk about, you know, discovery of America, 1492, and I always raise my hand when I go to the National History Museum. I tell them that, you know, those guys in the 4th floor, the Native Americans, they discovered America, you know. And it creates a very interesting provocation for people to think about that. So this, in the age of Enlightenment and Reformation, it was no longer politically correct to say that. So rather than Christianity being the claimant of all discoveries and being the moment of discovery, it became the West. It became when the guy has medicinal properties in a plant and his ancestors have known it for a very long time and they've been practicing it, that is not discovery. But when I file a patent in accordance with Western universalism norms and standards of what constitutes patents, and I've done it that way, then I put my stamp and say, I own it, it's mine. So whether it is patents, whether it is neuroscience being done by studying yogis, whatever, these are all ways of digesting into the belly of Western universalism. Okay? So being different is a response to that, a challenge to that. It says that when you are doing that, you're actually leaving a lot of good stuff behind. You're not just destroying that culture because you're denying them their sense of history, you're also denying yourself because you're taking only those things which fit your limited paradigm. And what doesn't fit your paradigm should actually challenge your paradigm. You should try to transform your own idea of your worldview, rather than trying to make them fit into your worldview. So the tension between that which is indigestible and the Western universalism is the meeting point, which every chapter of this book takes on another kind of difference, which is non-trivial. And I go through the whole book. What I'm telling you now is kind of a preface to the book, but the book itself summarizes it very quickly and then gives you one difference after another in a very substantial way. And these differences are extremely deep. And to resolve these differences, to get the full benefit of what I call the dharma civilization, one would have to make some compromises in one's worldview. I'm only looking for differences which are really tough, because if it's simple difference. You know, pop culture, what clothes we wear, what food we eat, you know, we all believe in certain common things, those are not very interesting to me. But things which are not, for instance, the idea of karma reincarnation, I take up as an idea, karma reincarnation and what its effect is on humanity. It's a huge amount of effect, karma reincarnation. And I explain just why one thinker after another from the West, while respecting it, liking it for a while, in the end, that very generic spirituality gives way to the digestion into Western universalism, where these ideas cannot be accepted, they cannot be accommodated, because they would undermine some very core ideas. Very core ideas. For instance, in the case of Christianity, original sin, and then virgin birth, redemption, sacrifice, all of that, as a story, as the Nicene Creed, the story that is the central story, the DNA, if you will. You take that and you take karma reincarnation, and either one will undermine the other. This is a very important point to talk about. And you know, part of being scientific and part of being management people and spiritual people means we should be able to discuss things that are outside the comfort zone. If all we can talk about is, you know, everything is great, we're all, you know, saying the same stuff, reinforce each other, hug and hold hands and sing and all, that's good. But you cannot really make progress if there is a shadow side which hides things that are not very easy to resolve, so we don't talk about them. So I'm interested in conversations about difference. I'm interested in having serious conversations with people from both sides. And my challenge is not, the most difficult challenge for me is not Westerners. It's very interesting. A very large number of Westerners I come across are actually very happy about this, because they think that the time has come. They'd like to have a deeper dive into this whole spiritual tradition and bring back a more authentic version, and not let it get digested and mapped back to Western universalism. I find a lot of Westerners are quite open to this. There are about 25 million Americans doing yoga, meditation, vegetarianism, these sort of things. And I would say a good 20% of them are ready to go deeper. And that's the people I want to talk to. My real challenge comes from Indians who have become so Western that they're saying, you know, you mean to tell me I gave up all of that to join this bandwagon, and now you're telling me there's something wrong with it, so now I waste my whole life. My whole investment is gone because I thought my benchmark of progress and development is based on how Western I became, and including gurus. A lot of the gurus are selling generic spirituality, you know, very diluted. They've taken out that which will not be digestible to the Westerner, rather than challenging the Westerner that you have to transform, and I can help you transform. And actually, if they did that, they'd be surprised how many takers there would be. People want the authentic, but they're being given the simple, diluted, you know, easy to get market share, easy to get a lot of clients. You can expand and become a global empire very quickly. But for a lot of people, for whatever reason, and I give all the psychological, based on many interviews of people who've U-turned, I come up with why they give up stage one. Maybe it's too hard, maybe India is very difficult, a lot of mosquitoes, they fell ill, or they had a bad experience, or whatever. So stage two is when they can sort of remove the non-digestible elements and call it universal generic spiritualism, which is easier to handle, which is sort of like, you know, not as intense, and they can say, the ego can justify it by saying, but this is more, everybody is universal, we're all one, why do we need to have all these things? There's always an argument of logic why they want to reject and give up certain aspects. So this is kind of stage two. And I think Deepak Chopra type people feed stage two. They're really, the clientele is stage two. Baba Ramdev's clientele will be stage one. Mata Amitabhayanand's clientele would be you know, stage one. So those kinds of, they're more sort of wanting to make sure that you've got the whole experience. So that's stage two, is a sort of decontextualizing. So stage one is in the original context. Stage two is decontextualized. Stage three is recontextualized. Now it is recontextualized as Western. It is now lucid dreaming, which has a neurological patent-based organization behind it, and its philosophical dimensions are derived from Western thinkers. So what they do is they look for Western thinkers who may not have said the same thing, but who could be, it could be implied that they might have meant the same thing. And so they are treated as a source. So the whole history of spiritual thought, the whole history of neuroscience, the whole history of medicinal plants has been rewritten in order to map it onto Western trajectories. Okay? And these are all stomachs, each one of them, the medicine, the culture, the spiritual and religious type, they're all different stomachs feeding into Western universalism. So that is stage four, which is re-Westernizing or Westernizing all these things. And much of what we call the West is actually a product of these U-turns that have happened with the encounter with various civilizations. I write about that at length. And then stage four is a very explicit rejection of the source. The source is rejected because it's primitive, it's abusive and oppressive, as if the Western history has not been. It is, it is not progressive enough. And if we recharacterize it in our framework, we can take it forward and give the gift to all of humanity, but if it is kept in the original framework, then it will be more limited. This is kind of an argument given. That is stage four. And five is when all of this reconstituted Western universalism is re-exported back to India, and Indians love to study it, like, wow, I got this emotional intelligence seminar. When you talk to the guy who invented emotional intelligence, he was studying gurus, he was studying with Buddhists and Hindus, and when in his dissertation at Harvard, they said if you do too much of this guru stuff, you're never going to get your degree. So he writes about how he had to clean out some of these things. So, but the Indian modern elite in Delhi, which is the circle I know best, I went to St. Stephen's College, a lot of elite people are produced from there. So when I go there and I tell them that I always have to start a spiritual discussion by introducing a Westerner. I have to even say, you know, Madonna is doing this, and they all get interested. Or I say there's going to be a seminar on emotional intelligence by such and such guy from a very prestigious place, they get interested. So I have to reintroduce their own heritage by letting the Western package universalism get in. And once the door is open, then I have to explain that there is loss of authenticity here in the digestion process. So whereas if I were to come in and say that, you know, do this, which my grandfather, it reminds them of their grandfather, they're going to, that's what they rejected. See, the colonization caused them to reject their own heritage. So the purpose of the U-turn is to reverse it, is become conscious of it so we can reverse it. And the purpose of discussing being different is to make people, both Indians and Westerners, conscious of this unconscious digestion that is going on so they can reflect on it. With that, I will close. Thank you very much and look forward to our workshop this afternoon.